Pariyatti Audiobooks presents Chapter 5, Right Effort, from Journey of Insight Meditation by Lerner, as read by Jonathan Nelson.
Chapter 5, Right Effort. Toward the end of the first week of the course, Hover introduced a new schedule for Vipassana meditation, which he had been shown on his recent trip to Burma. It consisted of 6 hour-long sittings each day, in which the resolve was made not to move at all. 2 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon, and 1 at night after his discourse, plus some hours in the early morning and after tea. It didn't take long for this regimen to produce some very deep pain. Shortly after we began it, a rock-hard knot about the size of a grapefruit surfaced in my neck. It grew in intensity during each hour-long sitting until I could no longer hold my attention on any other part of my body. When I focused right on the pain, my body would be gripped by enormous tension, and the knot would suddenly disappear. This thrilled me the first time, but it soon became clear that it only meant that the knot would be back the next hour, stiffer, larger, and more difficult to deal with. One morning I woke up shivering. My head was hot and my body ached. When I went into the meditation hall, I could barely sit up straight. At breakfast time, a course manager noticed me swaying as I stood in line for my bowl of oatmeal and asked me what was wrong. I hadn't the slightest idea, but I certainly couldn't eat any oatmeal. I told him that I thought I had some kind of fever. Finding my forehead pretty warm when he touched it, he had me escorted back to the tent, where I returned fully dressed to my sleeping bag. Shortly afterward, a young Swiss doctor who was doing the course took a look at me and concluded that I had a viral fever, probably carried by the mosquitoes. He said that I might be in for 5 or 6 days of illness. By midday, the chill seemed to have deepened, even though I was still in the sleeping bag. Blankets were brought to cover me, and my head was wrapped up, but I still felt intense coldness. At intervals, I began to break out in sweat until finally every layer of cover was tinged with dampness. Early the next morning, Hover came to see me. He sat on Travis's bed and smiled sympathetically as I babbled on about viruses and mosquitoes and fevers. "Don't worry about sitting in the hall. Just lie on your back and keep sweeping through the body from head to foot, over and over again. You're doing just fine." Then he got up and patted me on the shoulder. "I'll be looking in again, but if there's any need, you can just send for me." There were no more visitors. The course manager stopped by to see if I needed anything, and the Swiss doctor came with a thermometer. It seemed to me a little absurd for him to take my temperature, since the whole aim of the meditation was to rely on what you experience rather than what you're told, but I sat there, patiently, with the glass rod in my mouth. When everyone had left, I sneaked a look at the thermometer. It registered almost exactly 98.6 degrees. I popped it back in my mouth so fast I nearly swallowed it. 10 minutes later, my temperature was still the same. I lay on my back and began sweeping. Before long, I located an enormous knot of pain in my lower back. I thought it had to do with the pressure of my coccyx on the hard wooden bed, but a cushion on that spot did nothing. As the hours wore on, the pain at the base of my spine became excruciating. Once again, stretched that word to new limits. When I had talked of knots before, it had always seemed metaphorical. This one literally felt like a heavy, thick cord, a gymnasium rope for climbing, knotted around that spot in my back. The more I concentrated on it, the harder the 2 ends of the rope pulled. Sweat dripped down my temples, forming little puddles in my ears. My back would lift off the bed, and an involuntary, low, groaning sound was squeezed out of my chest. As I waited for the sighs to become breaths again, The dirty canvas of the tent came into focus above my eyes. I knew that all I had to do to end this pain was to stop looking at it. In fact, I knew, despite the good doctor's diagnosis, that my fever would be over if I simply got up, took a hot shower, and stopped this whole process, and never meditated again in my life. I forced my eyes shut until tears escaped from the corners. What was I doing? How had I gotten involved in this endless physical torture and mental agitation that had nothing to do with peace of mind? I thought of Goenka's smiling admonitions to be happy, and Hover's contrasting exhortations to basically bust your ass. I felt incapable of both. I had gone as far as I could go, and all I had attained was dirty, damp streaks across my cheeks that marked the end of my path. When Travis returned at tea time, I think my appearance frightened him. My eyes were glassy and wide, my hair wet and matted, my complexion chalky. I had spent the afternoon fighting a battle on two fronts, trying on one to deal with this endlessly re-exploding landmine in the bottom of my back, while fighting a shadow war with doubt. Doubt about my efforts, my sincerity, this meditation practice, the reality of this pain, and finally, my own sanity. I was losing ground. The pain had grown. It took very little searching to locate it, and when I did, I couldn't penetrate it. All I could do was ride with it for as long as I could, while it twisted my body and wrenched my psyche. When I could stand no more and had to let go, I knew I had failed. "Get Hover, please," I asked Travis. He was only too willing. "How's it going?" Hover asked with a smile as he seated himself. "What did the thermometer say?" "Perfectly normal." "How about that?" He reached over and felt my burning forehead with his hand. "Not exactly what you'd expect, is it?" "I don't know what to expect," I muttered. Then I explained the situation to him. He nodded patiently. "I can't do this anymore," I finally said. I hope I wasn't shouting. "I don't know what any of this has to do with insight or equanimity." He spoke gently. "We're here to end suffering, aren't we? That's what the Buddha taught. Not simply the truth of suffering, but its end as well. You're suffering. You've discovered some pain within you, some root of suffering. You didn't manufacture it. You simply developed a degree of concentration that allowed you to see into yourself, and this is what you've found. Now what are you going to do with it? Ignore it? Sit there with a saintly smile and say it doesn't exist? Of course it does. Your body is burning from it. So you make the decision to end this pain. Effort is required. Yes, effort. But just because you are making an effort to eliminate what you wish to be eliminated doesn't mean anger or hatred or lack of equanimity. We're talking about a different kind of effort, one that you're beginning to learn about, or you wouldn't have gotten this far. So you begin. You face what must be faced, with balance, not with fear or dread or expectation, with simple attention only. You attack the pain, and you don't turn away from it until it is gone. Right effort, the Buddha taught. That's the only kind that works. He waited a moment, then closed his eyes. "Shall we try it?" When I had closed my eyes, reluctantly abandoning a desire to fall asleep, he directed my attention right to the base of my spine. First, he had me explore the knot itself, moving all around it, becoming aware of its density, its specific points of hardness and greatest intensity. "Go deeper into it," he urged me. "Note how it alters, how it changes." My legs became so taut that I thought my knees would snap. But I had reached a deeper level of the knot, and I felt it pulsing, growing, and sinking as I watched. Now, Hover said, try to move it. Bring your attention down, underneath, and move it up your spine. Go ahead. It was like trying to carry an enormous canvas bag of water up a rickety wooden ladder. I wavered, then fell, then climbed higher, then fell again. And each fall shattered all my bones, crushed my mind, left me so deep inside the pain that I thought I'd never come out. Again, Hover's voice stopped the slide. This time, as you concentrate, think of anicca, impermanence, even repeat the word. I took hold of the knot, brought my attention behind it, and began to push. Slowly, a vertebra at a time, the knot rose up in my spine. My mind stopped writhing even as the pain continued. The sensation was like a boulder being forced through my body, yet it no longer hurt. My complete attention was on it. Every moment of my mind was filled with it. There was no time, no space for hurt to register. There was no separation between me and the pain. Suddenly, I understood what effort was, what right effort was. Complete effort, total effort. Keep going, Hover commanded in a whisper. Keep going, anicca, anicca, anicca. The effect of the word was to drive my attention through the knot like a steel spike. The meter of my mind that registers pain blew its circuits, and in the shattering of glass and the sizzling of shorted wires, I repeated the word, anicca, 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 as a simple reminder of what I was really observing, impermanence, changing phenomenon. That's enough for now, Hover said. You're doing just fine, just fine. Keep working, moving that mass down now. If you need me, just call. Then he took my blanket, tucked it up around my chin, patted me on the shoulder, and left me with a smile of perfect kindness that made me wonder why I'd ever doubted. At 4 a.m. the next morning, the alarm clock went off. I got out of my sleeping bag and picked up my toothbrush and towel, fully expecting to take my place in the meditation hall this morning. Thus, it came as a bit of a shock as I squatted over the Indian-style, ground-level toilet to observe coal-black feces dropping out of me, while my knees grew so rubbery I thought I'd fall in after them. I couldn't believe it. As I numbly returned to my cocoon, I could not even recall the sensation of calm and certitude of less than 12 hours ago. 12 hours? Had I ever felt that this was anything but insanity? Had I ever felt anything but miserably sick, fed up, and full of doubt? You're doing fine, he had said. But now? I searched carefully through my body, found almost immediately the cloud of pain behind my forehead, felt my body wince, felt my mind wince harder, almost in disbelief. Yes, I had fully expected it all to be gone this morning. To go through it all again, and perhaps again and again, was a concept I simply could not embrace. Doubt spread over the surface of my mind like a rash. Little whispers that I slapped into silence popped up elsewhere as screams. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. The protest became hysterical laughter. But the doubt had nothing at all to do with this method, this teacher. I doubted me. I was distracted from that silent confrontation by the banging of my head against the wooden bed. I propped myself up on my elbow, groping for the tent flap. No one was around. It was mid-morning, and everyone was in the hall. When I swung my legs down, they tangled in the blankets and the bag. For the first time in my life, I felt the chilled, clammy hands of desperation on the back of my neck. I was trapped, burning, and tangled in my sweat-soaked blankets with no refuge from the fever that was consuming me. At that moment, I experienced no blinding flash of insight, no transcendent wisdom, only the frustration of knowing myself at the level that illuminated the entanglement of the situation, but not the way out of it. I had shielded myself from this moment all my life. I had always managed to save myself from failure before it came, by abandoning my commitment to a person or a goal before rejection came. I had always had perfect confidence in all my capabilities except one, the ability to survive failure. It was utter fear of being knocked on my ass. That's just where I had landed, and it didn't feel good. My body and mind had failed. I was beaten and exhausted. All I could do was seethe in helpless rage. I hated this place, these people, and myself. The fight was over, but now what? The pain was still right there, but the fear of the pain was gone. I relaxed on my bed, calmly miserable, alone with the strange consolation of one who has survived a disaster. In my own personal holocaust, I had just lost what I'd held most dear, success. And without choosing to, I'd survived. A strange, empty, uncaring attitude filled me. Let them know I'm not in the hall. I'm not sick and not meditating. Let them know I've failed. I closed my eyes and lay still. My body ceased to console itself. My mind had little more to say. I felt as if I'd been tumbling interminably down a deep shaft, and now, as I lay on my back, all I could do was stare quietly at the pinhole of light far, far above me. It is hard to describe what happened next. The pain began again. The next thing I was aware of was my attention moving in a steady motion down through my body from head to foot. A certain cheerful exuberance pervaded my effort, and it didn't fade even when the sensation deep within my skull re-emerged. During the 4 uninterrupted hours that I continued to work, contortions and chills lost their drama, and my pain lost its fascination. I was operating in a soundless space where my actions had no vibrations, no significance. When the knot of pain had worked its way down to the very base of my spine and begun to grow there with increasingly rapid pulsations so that my body seemed to be drawn and quartered, I simply watched. Then, the very next instant, as I did absolutely nothing, the entire mass came roaring back up my spine like a locomotive with its whistle screaming, leaped into my head, and came exploding out the top. In its wake, a wave rolled up from my toes, and I felt as if I were being emptied of all the contents of my body through the top of my head. A few minutes later, Travis came in to find me out of my sleeping bag, sitting up in only my light cotton pants and shirt. "I know," I said before he could speak. "You just had a great meditation. Where's the peanut butter?" He had saved some. I finished it and the other food he had brought. Then I collapsed into sleep. I woke up 12 hours later, took a shower and shaved, and dressed in clean white clothes. Then, barefoot, despite the cold, I went to see Hover. "What was it?" I asked him, even before I said hello. He was staring at my face and looked pleased. I felt a little self-conscious, but also aware that I probably did look different. It had to show. I felt about 50 pounds lighter, and as though my feet were not quite touching the ground. A warmth seemed to be radiating out from my skin for a good couple of inches. "What difference does it make?" Hover finally shrugged. "What will labeling it do? What we're interested in here is the process, the development of a state of mind in response to phenomena, mental and physical. Don't confuse the effects you see with the process of insight itself. That night, I learned a little more about effects when Hover told the group the story of his own life and his experiences with his teacher, Uba Khin. I was the first Western engineer to ever hit the International Meditation Center in Rangoon, Hover related. The impression he gave was that none of it was meant to be, yet it had all come to pass. He was a research specialist for North American Aviation Corporation, a martini-drinking, cigar-smoking father of four, whose only knowledge of Buddhism, as he put it, was how to spell it. Simply from speaking a few words with an acquaintance who had just returned from a visit to the center in Rangoon, he carefully arranged to step out of his life for a month to fly halfway around the world for meditation, when that word hadn't even popped up yet on the borders of American consciousness. Once he arrived in Rangoon, almost from the moment he sat down, it was perfectly clear that he would have to face extraordinary obstacles to his practice. All he had going for him, it seemed, was effort. I was a 5-pillow man, Hover described. One under my seat, one under each knee, one behind my back against the wall, and one that I brought along. And he waved his hand in the air, shaking an imaginary pillow that you could practically see, just in case. He demonstrated his initial sitting posture, slumped shoulders, knees jutting up in the air, and an expression of naive bewilderment on his face. He recalled the actual physical manifestations he went through, the pain-locked joints, the contortions he thought would break him in two as they bent his body into positions that could not be duplicated, the sensation of having his skin lump up as if pencil erasers were being pushed outward from within his body, 2 changes of clothing a day as he soaked through them with sweat within a few hours. In fact, he finally said, there is nothing that any of you have told me about that I didn't go through, physical and otherwise. He paused and took a breath. There are crows that live in the trees surrounding the center in Rangoon, big black birds, he began once again, and you can hear them at almost any time of day. Once, as I lay in my sleeping quarters, I looked up and saw one flying by, saw it clearer than I've ever seen anything. As I stared at it, I was staring clean through it, as if looking at an X-ray picture, and I could see its flight slowed down, each movement separated into 100 distinct moments. Suddenly, he raised his arms like the big wings of those crows. His head was altered, and his body seemed to be buoyed off his pillow. Then he flapped his arms slowly, tick, 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 like a series of pictures, flashed in rapid succession on a screen. And then I heard its cry, and it was like I'd never heard a crow's voice before. Caw, 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 caw. And it was no ordinary sound. It was a cry for help, to escape. It was the cry of suffering, of dukkha.
Pariyatti, a nonprofit 501c3 organization, offers a wide variety of books, eBooks, videos, and audiobooks about the teachings of the Buddha, the Pāli language, and Vipassana meditation. Browse our complete catalog at www.pariyatti.org.